Well, most of you know that Bradley Manning is facing a court-martial. He's got 22 different charges against him. Of course, he leaked information to WikiLeaks, and we know that now because he has admitted some of those charges, the smaller charges, in his court-martial. Now, what we never got to hear from is Bradley Manning himself. That's because this trial is shrouded in secrecy, a bit ironic given the case, and no audio or video of the trial is allowed. You're not even allowed to take a picture of Bradley Manning. Well, the Freedom of the Press Foundation has gotten a hold of the full testimony that Bradley Manning gave in court. It's over an hour long. They have the whole tapes and they've put them up. Now, Michael Isikoff of NBC explains a little bit more detail.
I am the type of person who wants to know how things work, and as an analyst, this means I always want to figure out the truth.
That's the voice of Army Private Bradley Manning being heard publicly for the first time this morning. Manning recently admitted he illegally gave WikiLeaks hundreds of thousands of government documents, as well as this 2007 video of a helicopter attack in Iraq that mistakenly killed innocent civilians.
They dehumanized the individuals they were engaging and seemed to not value human life by referring to them as, quote, dead bastards, unquote.
Now, I want to talk about that more and show you more of the tapes so that you can listen for yourself for the first time. So let's bring in Trevor Timm. He is actually the co-founder and executive director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, who supports, of course, and funds independent journalism organizations and released these tapes today. Great to have you with us, Trevor.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So, first of all, your decision on releasing these tapes, could it get you in trouble? Obviously, Manning is facing a court-martial for releasing information he shouldn't have released.
Well, it's up in the air as to whether it was illegal to actually record this footage, but you know, as far obviously we had nothing to do with the recording, and as far as publishing it goes, that's obviously protected by the First Amendment, just like WikiLeaks publishing the classified information that Private First Class Bradley Manning gave them is protected by the First Amendment. So you know, hopefully no repercussions will come of this for you know, anybody in the courtroom. But as far as us go, you know, we're pretty safe in the fact that, you know, this is a newsworthy event, and this is information that the American public should have, and we are in, you know, well within our rights to publish it.
Well, certainly, as you mentioned there, WikiLeaks appears to have been well within their rights too, but a grand jury possibly has been convened in Virginia, as far as we hear from the press reports. So you never know what the U.S. government does. In fact, let me read you a statement from the U.S. Army Military District in Washington and get your reaction. The U.S. Army Military District in Washington has notified the military judge presiding over the United States versus Private Bradley Manning court-martial that there was a violation of the rules of the court. The U.S. Army is currently reviewing the procedures set in place to safeguard the security and integrity of the legal proceedings and ensure Private Manning receives a fair and impartial trial. Do you think that they are concerned about a fair and impartial trial, or are they concerned about something else?
Well, it seems like they're concerned about excessive secrecy. I mean, beyond not having audio or visual recordings of this trial, you know, the official transcripts are never released. The prosecution's briefs and motions are never released to the public, so we can't properly analyze their legal arguments. Even the judge's court orders weren't released until a group of journalists sued the court under the Freedom of Information Act to get this information. They belatedly released a few of the court orders, you know, weeks and months after they happened, and still haven't released a host of others. So, you know, this trial, which is centers around freedom of information and government secrecy, is, you know, one of the most secretive trials in the modern era itself.
So, Trevor, I want to play some more of the tapes for you and then get your reaction to that too. In one of the parts that you guys released, Bradley Manning talks about why he released information to WikiLeaks in the first place. Let's listen.
I believe that if the general public, especially the American public, had access to the information contained within the Sydney I and Sydney A tables, this could spark a domestic debate on the role of the military and our foreign policy in general, as well as related to Iraq and Afghanistan. I also believe the detailed analysis of the data over a long period of time by different sectors of society might cause society to reevaluate the need or even the desire to engage in counterterrorism and counterinsurgency operations that ignore the complex dynamics of the people living in the affected environment every day.
Trevor, now according to his own testimony, and it's actually backed up by what he said when he did not realize that he was being recorded by the informant before his arrest, it matches up. He actually wanted to help the American public engage in a debate about what we were doing in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, is that relevant to his trial, or will they simply say, the government simply say, well, I don't really care what your intent was. You released this information, and so, you know, they, of course, want as far as a life sentence for him. So is it relevant?
Well, obviously, it absolutely should be relevant, but I guess it's the open question about whether it will be relevant. You know, we're talking about, you know, whether Bradley Manning's a whistleblower and everything, but we should, you know, remind ourselves that he's already pled guilty to 10 charges, and he'll be facing up to 20 years in jail. It's the absurd aiding the enemy charge that the government is bringing against him and the Espionage Act charges that are so worrying here. You know, we've seen government report after government report, leaked to the media talking about how, you know, WikiLeaks actually did no harm to national security, and it was a little embarrassing to the government, but we've learned so much about it. And, you know, the information about not causing harm to national security isn't even allowed in the trial. And I think part of the reason Manning made this statement is so that he could get his thoughts on the record about his intent, how he wanted to start a domestic debate in this country about the wars, how he was horrified by what he saw in the helicopter video, and how he was dismayed that the Reuters journalists that were killed, their parent company, the Reuters news agency, tried to get this through the Freedom of Information Act and failed, and he wanted to get it to them. And he talks about how diplomacy is conducted under this cloak of secrecy, and he wishes it was conducted more out in the open. And you know, the problem with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he was seeing corruption and wrongdoing, and he was trying to report it to his superiors, and they weren't responding. They were telling him to ignore it. And so, you know, all of these thoughts in his head culminated in him releasing these documents. And he talks about how this, you know, wasn't a rash decision made at the spur of the moment, but he had come to it over weeks and weeks, and he had tried to go to even the major papers, the New York Times and Washington Post, before he went to WikiLeaks. And luckily, he did go to WikiLeaks because they shared this information with, you know, 5 or 6 papers at first and then hundreds later. So we really got the full scope and the full idea about what this information actually told the American public.
And Trevor, on that note, I want to play a piece of the Bradley Manning tape because a lot of his opponents and critics will say, oh, he carelessly released these cables, including the diplomatic cables that he released. But his testimony indicates otherwise. Let's listen to that.
The more I heard the cables, the more I came to the conclusion that this type of information should become public. I thought these cables were a prime example of the need for a more open diplomacy. Given all the Department of State information I read, the fact that most of the cables were unclassified, and that all the cables had the SIP disk caption, I believe that the public release of these cables would not damage the United States. However, I do believe that the cables might be embarrassing, since they represent very honest opinions, assessments, or statements behind the backs of other nations and organizations.
Trevor, explain why that's important to the audience, the care that he took in looking over the materials before he released it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think critics point to the fact that there are so many documents in the public domain now, and that he was, as you said, careless. But in fact, he could have released even more information, even more secretive information. You know, Daniel Ellsberg, the famous Pentagon Papers whistleblower, you know, the person that is held up as a hero in liberal circles and elsewhere, talks about how Bradley Manning actually had access to much higher classified information, and he could have released more. And actually, he was very careful in what he did choose and choose not to release. And, you know, I think it's important to point out that, you know, we hold Daniel Ellsberg to be this hero, and he absolutely is, but the information that he released was top secret, and the information that Bradley Manning released, some of it was secret, which is much lower, and some of it was not classified at all. And so he's kind of put out there by government officials as this, you know, evil person who was, you know, going against the interests of the United States and possibly aiding the enemy.
Right.
You know, when in fact this information, a lot of it wasn't even classified to begin with.
All right. Trevor Timm, Executive Director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, thank you for joining us. And by the way, thank you for releasing the audio. We appreciate it. It's good to hear from Bradley Manning himself. The government has been obviously trying to bottle him up this entire time. It's about damn time we heard it from him. So thank you, Trevor.
Well, thank you.
All right, and before we go, I just want to make clear to the audience. Look, I was asking him questions there, as we always do here on the show. But time for my personal commentary. Woodward sources released top secret information, more classified than Bradley Manning. Unless the government, which of course leaked the information to Bob Woodward himself, starts arresting their own and putting them, whether it's a court-martial if they were military or otherwise, and charging them with the Espionage Act or whatever else it might be, unless they arrest Woodward's sources immediately, they should free Bradley Manning yesterday. Free him, free him, free him. He's a classic whistleblower. He tried to tell us what our government was up to. He hoped that we would have a debate about it. Unfortunately, our politicians are not interested in that debate. They're interested in more secrecy and more wars, including, by the way, the people who are prosecuting Bradley Manning, the Obama administration, who promised you change and gave you none of it. Now, when we come back,